Hello everyone, welcome to CLAT SAGA. This is Khan sir. Today's topic we are going to discuss on role of Article 368 and Article 13 subclass 2. I think recent days many of you seen in newspaper somewhere I think there's some words which we might have seen, that judicial activism, judicial overreach, and some of you might have seen or read about judicial ultra activism. In this scenario, if you could see this, the organs of the government, legislature, executive and judiciary has its own authority, which it was clearly mentioned by theory of separation by Montesquieu. However, the topic is aside, but I'm going to tell you the sum of words, whereas you can see how parliament is become important in order to making of laws, as well as how fundamental rights are very, very important, where parliament at the time of making of laws, how it has to consider the rights of an individual. In keeping in view of that, we are going to discuss a very, very important topic, that is role of Article 368 and Article 13 subclass 2 of Indian Constitution, and how this makes us to understand at the time of amendment of the fundamental rights. So this I'm going to discuss about the first one. What is the Article 368 states in the Constitution of India? And the second one, what is Article 13 subclass 2 states in Indian Constitution, that we shall discuss once it is completed Article 368. Okay. Now, first it starts with what is Article 368 and how it is important in the Constitution of India. Article 368 and Article 368 subclass 2 states that amendability of fundamental rights as well as, or you can say, amendability of Constitution. Okay. Article 368 states that amendment of the Constitution including fundamental right. This procedure initially we have taken from South African Constitution, because at the time of 1946, Constituent Assembly makers, what they have made the provision, soon after when society starts evolving or changing, some provisions may have its own changes, as well as the Constitution also should have a dual mode where it should have rigidity as well as the flexibility. In order to maintain the flexibility of it, they have mentioned the Article 368 that by changing of the society for their need, able to serve to the people needs, the Constitution also should be acclimatized. In keeping in view of that, there is an amendability procedure which are mentioned in the Constitution of India under the Article 368 subclass 2. What is amendment procedure? I think, and most of the time you might have understand that in my classes about what is amendability. See, amendment is something which makes you to add some new provisions to the constitution. Whereas this authority who has an authority in India in order to add of any provisions to the Constitution of India means Parliament. Under the Article 368, it is given power to the Parliament to amend any part of the Constitution including fundamental right. This was a definition which we understand whenever you see the status of an Article 368 in the Constitution of India. Now, point is that how amendment should be done. Any amendment which requires the majority in the Parliament, whereas any amendment in the procedure, a house which required the special majority of 2/3 of the majority which is required to amend any thing which is related to constitutional bills. Okay. Anything which you need to amend as a part of the Constitution of India need a 2/3 of the majority at the day of presenting in the House. By this constitutional bill can be introduced in either house of the Parliament, whether it can be in Lok Sabha and as well as to Rajya Sabha. And it shall be presented for the President for assenting on the bill. Then soon after the President shall assent the bill, then and then it converted into the Act. And change into the Act. So as amendability procedure, if you could see in the Constitution of India, it says that 2/3 of the majority which is required for the constitutional bill, either house of the Parliament we can introduce it. Once the President shall assent it, then it shall change into the Act. So this is a procedure. However, whereas if you could see, Constitution of India many times went into the change, and as well as that, and who has an authority to change, or who has every authority in order to checks and balances of these amendment, whether it shall be under the Constitution and it is not in the Constitution. That the authority given to here Supreme Court of India. Supreme Court of India. That is a part of judiciary. That is a part of judiciary. Right from this Article 368, if you see this amendment procedure to the Constitution of India. Whereas if you could see Article 13, it talks about or it states about if state passes any law. If state passes any law for the amendment of one second, for the amendment of FR shall be declared as void. Means, as it is mentioned in the fundamental rights, like fundamental rights, if you see in the Constitution of India, which has mentioned from Article 12 to 35. Article 12 to 35. In Article 13, it says that anything which related to fundamental rights amendment cannot introduce by the state. Means state does not have any authority to amend any of the provision. If such provision, if it is introduced into the Parliament by either house of the Parliament, shall be declared as void. This is written in the Constitution of India. So what did happen? That it shall lead to the clash between to whom Article 368 and Article 13 subclass 2. Do you understand my point? Now, these clash, how and one can overcome it, which we need to understand. Right from, this clash which arises as the Supreme Court of India right from 1951 right from 1951 to 1965 consistently interpreted its judgment that where Supreme Court interpreted that Parliament has every authority to amend the constitution including fundamental rights. In its judgment, right from A.K. Gopalan case 2, I think everybody knows that A.K. Gopalan case was and held that by Supreme Court of India in the year of 1951. He was a leader of Kerala Communist Party and he was imprisoned by the Article 21 when he approached to the court, Supreme Court of India, which interpreted a judgment that and his arrest was constitutional. It was not an unconstitutional. Which means that any law which was prepared by the Parliament of India, it used to supported by the Parliament because it is clearly says into that in Article 368 is a amendability and provision in the Constitution of India, whereas the Parliament has an every right in order to amendment of it. Okay. So now my point is that here you need to understand clearly that right from 1951 to 1965, if you could see, Parliament consistently maintained the Article 368 and it should be under the Constitution, and whereas the Parliament has an every right to amend any part of the Constitution of India including and fundamental rights. But there was an very new judgment which held it by the Supreme Court of India after 1968. What was happened that when Supreme Court of India maintained consistently its interpretation about Parliament and about 368 article amendment till 1965, but soon after the 1965, there was a lot of changes which have been took place. Let me tell you first, there was introduction of 17th Constitutional Amendment Act by Parliament. In that and 17th Constitutional Amendment Act, the government introduced reforms in Article 31. What is Article 31? In the 1963, as far as concerned to there is a right to property to keep aside right to property went into certain amendments, which and as till the time of 1964, if you could see, till the time of 1964, if you could see that here 31 an article shall treated to be as a fundamental right, whereas the fundamental rights and it is becomes qualified to the individual where there is no chance of to amending the direct and provisions of it, and hence the 17th Constitutional Amendment, it was questioned in the court by Golaknath versus State of Punjab. Golaknath, State of Punjab, in the 1965, they questioned into the court amendment to this, and that in 31 and was challenged into the court, and they have raised the writ petition in the Supreme Court of India. As it is mentioned in the writ petition, violation of the fundamental rights. As in keeping in view of that, in the Golaknath and versus State of Punjab case, Supreme Court of India and interpreted that clearly Article 13 subclass 2, it is become a supreme, whereas the Article 368 and it becomes a subordinate to the fundamental right. What it means exactly in this judgment, in the Golaknath judgment, After, that an 11 members constitutional bench, after studied it, they said Parliament cannot amend the fundamental rights, only it has ordinary legislative powers. Only it has ordinary legislative powers. In a kind of powers, as far as concerned to the Constitution of India, the Parliament has only ordinary legislative powers, whereas it does not have constituent and legislative powers. Where you need to understand that, where Parliament does not have constituent legislative powers, only it has an authority to make ordinary legislative powers in this. So what I wanted to tell you here is that the Parliament, which and only can entertain or exercise its ordinary legislative powers, whereas this constituent legislative powers cannot be and execute by the Parliament of India. This was a judgment which gave in the Golaknath versus State of Punjab. In this case, and it is clearly mentions that, Parliament, it has become subordinate to the fundamental rights, whereas Article 13 subclass 2, it becomes powerful. Even in this judgment, not only the Supreme Court, it said it that the fundamental rights are sacrosanct and very powerful and absolute, but also it said that it is provided and the capacity of transcendental. In the Golaknath case, the Supreme Court of India has clearly mentioned that it was the fundamental rights are transcendental in nature. Transcendental in nature means overriding authority. It has an overriding authority. What you need to understand here is that whereas the 13th subclass 2, it becomes very powerful, whereas the fundamental rights, it becomes a subordinate to the, and where Parliament, it becomes a subordinate to the FRs. So where it clearly mentions that, it only mentions in the article subclass 2 procedure to amendment. Merely it has mentioned procedure to amendment, but it does not mention anything which is related to how to amend the Constitution of India, including fundamental right. And also this judgment, even that the court and the government which were challenged in the Supreme Court, and what authority has Parliament in order to amendment of it. But in this perspective, it says that only it has an ordinary legislative authority, where it cannot have any kind of authority in order to interventions of this and constituent and legislative authority. Whereas this is given transcendental, and also it is become, in this judgment, the Supreme Court have also requested to the government reconstitute the Constituent Assembly, which was happened in the year of 1950s before. So this was completely retrograde judgment which was passed by the Supreme Court of India in the 19th, and that in 67 later, it was become more and rigorous and statement by the Supreme Court of India, whereas constantly society is moving by the evolving of a society. There should be a changes into the provision of the Constitution of India, where it helps out the people of the nation, so that and easily it will be able to serve to the peoples and when there are need be. As it is concerned to this, and this was completely ignored into the judgment of this Golaknath, and finally the Parliament of India, it becomes a subordinate to the and fundamental rights, then Article 13, it becomes so powerful, whereas Article 368, it has become a subordinate to the Article 13 subclass 2. So what I mean to say, thus, what you need to understand exactly here is that soon after this, what has happened that in the year of, so as such, in order to changing the provision in the year of 1971, in order to make certain changes in the Constitution of India, especially in the Article 13, in 24th Constitutional Amendment, it was introduced in the Parliament in the year of 1971. According to this 1971 24th Constitutional Amendment, where they mentions that Article 13 and they were added changes to the Constitution of India, Article 13 subclass 4, and in that they mention there is nothing shall be applied to the Article 368 and which have mentioned in the Article 13 subclass 2. Which means Article 13 subclass 4 made it an Article 13 subclass 2, it becomes an redundant. Okay, it was become an useless. Whereas in this and scenario in the 1961, and you know that and it said that Parliament, it is a supreme, it has an every authority to make any amendment as far as concerned to the fundamental right. This was again, and it become a controversy, and again it has led to the clashes between the Article 368 and 13 subclass 2. In this, and again, and in the year of 1973, and Keshavananda Bharati question challenged is a writ petition in the Supreme Court of India in the year of 1973. It was State of Kerala versus State of Kerala, State of Kerala. It was challenged by, in the year of 1973, that in this Keshavananda Bharati case, they were challenged that the right to property cannot be abridged from the individual because it was part of fundamental rights. In this case, Keshavananda Bharati and question, this was a larger bench which consists of 703 pages of document and 68 days of time it has taken. And you know that this was the largest bench in the history of Supreme Court, where the 13 members constitutional and constitutional bench, it was created to prosecute the case. And again, for the prosecution of this case, 100 and other cases it was kept aside in order to giving this judgment. As in this Keshavananda Bharati's case, the Supreme Court of India has interpreted the judgment. The Parliament has authority, and it should be under the consideration of Doctrine of Basic Structure. It should be under the consideration of Doctrine of Basic Structure. Okay, Doctrine of Basic Structure. Here, Doctrine of Basic Structure means what? Without disturbing the original provision of the Constitution of India, Parliament can amend any provision including fundamental right. This was a judgment, it was given in the Keshavananda Bharati's case. Hence, the clash between the 368 article and 13 subclass 2, it is completely and subsided soon after the 1973 by the judgment of this and Keshavananda Bharati. Since in the landmark, the Keshavananda Bharati case is to be considered as landmark judgment in the history of India as far as concerned to the constitutional and amendment, isn't it? Thank you so much for listening this class. We'll discuss another topic in the next class. Thank you everyone.